I think what I'd like to do is maybe just start off by having each side give a brief 1 or 2 minute introduction about why they think voters should either vote for or against the measure. And if I'm not sure if it be Donovan or Colleen or Rebecca who wants to take that on the yes side. Okay, great. And if you can just kind of tell us briefly like what the ballot measure is and why you think voters should approve it, that'd be great.
Sure. My name is Colleen Carroll, and I'm a volunteer with the Eviction Representation for All campaign. And at its heart, the measure, which is Measure 26238, would offer a proven solution to address housing insecurity and reduce homelessness in our community. Tenant right to counsel has been around in over 16 jurisdictions for several years now. It started in New York City, and it's been implemented, like I said, across the nation. And so we have lots and lots of data to show how a program like this is incredibly effective at reducing the amount of evictions, not only filings, but also judgments of evictions. Our program also takes it one step further and creates the conditions under which tenant right to counsel or legal support for eviction cases would be available to tenants at a much earlier stage than is available in Oregon today. By making these services available at the notice of termination stage, we are basically intervening way earlier, and so that hopefully loads of cases don't ever make it to court in the first place. And then for the cases that do make it to court, right now, only 9% of tenants had legal representation in 2022, but an overwhelming amount of landlords hire either a lawyer or an agent to represent them. They know that having legal representation and legal expertise helps them in court. It helps them to navigate the many, laws and little legal mechanisms that are used to resolve eviction cases. The reality is, most eviction cases are not adjudicated. They don't make it to a judge. They are negotiated, or they're either won by default, which means that the landlord wins merely by filing the case. So the legal merits are never examined, or they are negotiated in what's called a stipulated agreement. And if anybody, for anybody who's ever had any interaction with the legal system, if you have to, in a matter of minutes, negotiate a legal settlement by yourself, and when you're doing that up against somebody who has the legal expertise, there's no way that those negotiations can be just and fair. And so by adding legal representation for all tenants, we're making the system that exists, all of the laws that already exist, more usable to tenants. Nothing about our measure changes what is or isn't, evictable. It just requires that the evictions that do occur are just and fair. And so I think it's really important to know that this is working in many, many other communities, and that over 60 organizations and individuals, people who live here, right, unions and faith communities, see the benefits of this, because we see what is happening in our community when we look outside and how hard it is to stay housed. And so one of the thing is, like, we're going to hear like this is expensive or something like that. It is so much more expensive to not do this. We are paying the downstream costs of evictions, which are just magnitudes more than what it would cost to implement this program. Yeah, so I think that's basically what I'll say for now.
Great, thank you so much. And Andrew or Diana, whoever wants to take this would be great.
Sure, thanks. And again, Andrew Hone, President and CEO of the Portland Business Alliance, which is Greater Portland's Chamber of Commerce, and we're here to urge a no vote on this measure. And just to lead that, actually, we agree on nearly every aspect of the programmatic features and the absolute and important message that representation for people facing eviction is critical. And I can say, and I know you know this, Helen and Laura, that I was here nearly 3 years ago to date to argue in support of the Metro Supportive Housing Services measure, which enacted the largest per capita revenue stream in the nation on top of already existing funding for homelessness services here in our region. And the key elements of that were 75% dedicated to chronic homelessness and 25% to upstream solutions. Those include tenant representation, rental assistance, and the things that prevent people from entering the cycle of homelessness. And as someone that's worked in legal services in New York on tenant eviction protections with the largest provider of eviction representation in the city, as well as working for the largest provider of homeless services in the city of New York, I couldn't agree more on some of the aspects of the program. None of those mentioned on the nationwide programs that provide eviction representation use a capital gains tax to pay for them. And we all know that right now that this is in fact the highest tax location in the nation at 14.7% marginal income tax rate for just state and local taxes. We are paying more than any other community in the country, respective to New York City's 14.8% rate, which starts at 25 million. Ours starts at 125,000. We know that the cost of living here is exorbitant and that Portlanders and those that live in Multnomah County face a lot of challenges, and housing is expensive here. Underproduction is the key driver of that. This proposed tax is a tax on housing and makes it more expensive. We also know that this has to be the first tax in the nation, which is a tax to pay for a tax. With the Revenue Bureau's analysis, we now know that the expense purely of enacting this tax will be greater than the revenue that it generates. This is an adjustable rate. As a result of it being an adjustable rate, it will immediately have to adjust upwards to compensate for the fact that it will cost $20 million purely to implement on the tax collection. We see and we know that it's difficult for local governments to enact new measures. This is one of the few locations in the nation that has, actually it's the only, 4 separate income taxes. It's extremely complex and it places a heavy burden. This tax, again, will impact those who own homes, families, seniors, small businesses, but not large businesses. No exemption for home sales, retirement accounts, or family-owned businesses. We know that it is extremely volatile and that we will have to adjust this immediately because of the cost of collection. And this is just not the right tax to pay for these programs. We have an existing revenue stream. We should be working together as a community to address those issues, not enacting an entirely new, highly complicated tax on our community.
Great. Thanks very much. Let's start off with whoever from the yes side wants to respond to this. Why choose a capital gains tax? Why is that the best method to do this as opposed to the existing revenue streams such as the Metro Supportive Homeless Services tax?
Rebecca, do you want to take it or do you want me to?
I can take it. Hello, I'm Rebecca. I use she, her pronouns. I'm one of the volunteers on the Eviction Representation for All, Vote Yes on Measure 26238 measure. I would like to say that I've been a part of this process since the very beginning. Way back in, I think, the end of 2020, we were looking at ways to mitigate the growing eviction crisis that we were witnessing in eviction court. And this is where we learned about the right to cancel movement. And we really believe in the fact that providing legal representation is a very inexpensive way to reduce the harm created by evictions, because evictions are traumatic and violent. And we also wanted to do so in a way that would not actually be shifted onto the tenants who would be experiencing these like traumatic, preventable like life events. We wanted to ensure that the tax or a means of funding it would also not be subjected to budgetary processes within the county. We didn't want it to be subjected to the kinds of like political theater we're seeing with the same funds that Andrew keeps mentioning that's being fought with Metro and the county and the city of Portland. We wanted to ensure that there was a dedicated funding stream to make this program as sustainable, and also to ensure that, again, it would not be passed on to tenants. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Colleen?
Sure, there's a couple of things. So yeah, I think the Oregon Center for Public Policy has recently released a great report that talks about how capital gains, which is the money you make when you sell an asset, those assets are mostly stocks and bonds. So stocks, bonds, and other property. So the Oregon Public Policy released a report that identifies how few people pay these taxes. It's less than 20% of Oregonians who report capital gains. And of that 20%, it's really highly concentrated in the top 1% of Oregonians. And so this is a targeted tax for people who make a lot of money by selling stocks, bonds, and other assets. Now, Andrew talked a little bit about like small business owners, and just yesterday I was presenting in front of a neighborhood association, and that question came up again. Somebody said, please explain to me how a small business would accrue capital gains tax, right? Because the person presenting was saying, oh, when you sell stuff, and they were like, so like if I'm a coffee shop and I sell coffee, and that's not it. It is not the items you sell. So the coffee shop example, it would be if that coffee shop decided to sell their espresso machine, right? They own a thing, it's an asset they own and they sell it. And so our tax, which is 0.75%, and yes, it's adjustable, but it's adjustable in the way that all taxes are adjustable. This is no more or less adjustable than any other tax that exists. It would have to go through a vote of the county commissioners to be raised or lowered. And so back to the coffee shop, right? So if you sell that coffee maker, right, as a couple $1,000, 0.75% of the money you make by selling that is what would go to this measure. And that is a negligible amount of money. When we look at, again, capital gains over the past 15 years, the way that we got to 0.75% was looking at how much capital gains are reported. And if you think about it like in real terms, if you are a person who's filing your individual tax returns, and if that's either your personal, you're selling stocks and bonds, or your businesses or whatever, you would have to report $500,000 or $500,000 in capital gains to pay $3,000 towards this measure. So I just want to be clear that we are talking about a tiny percentage.
Okay, and understanding that it's a tiny percentage, but I mean, how practical is this when, you have people who don't actually even know what a capital gains tax is, what counts as a capital gain? And, is it really both fair and efficient to have to ask small business owners to record every expense of every time they sell an asset and the amount for which that's going to be they'll owe the tax, and have it enforced, and then spread that out across all small businesses, and it goes beyond that as well. But
sure, that's a great point. The thing is, everybody who files a tax return, either federally or at the state, already is reporting capital gains. This isn't a new thing. This isn't an increase on a tax that already exists. If you already make and report capital gains, this is an increase of 0.75%. So it's, to be clear, right? Like we're using the federal definition. And I think that there is some wordsmithing happening about, what is and isn't in the measure. So we use the federal definition, and that's what, right? So one of the things, sorry, I'm just going to go back. Right. So if you already report capital gains, then you already know, right, how much you make or you don't make. And again, it's very few people. And the people who make a lot of money and need those kind of complicated, questions, they have wealth management firms helping them to do their taxes, which is why that's part of the people who are opposing this measure, right? We have wealth management firms who don't take clients at less than $100,000 who are opposing this, because that's who's being targeted by this. So yes, so I think, okay, but I will answer your question. Yes, I think that there's a great solution. State legislatures could adopt, could change and add a schedule line for this tax, as well as the other local taxes that have been mentioned, so that Oregonians who live in Multnomah County only have to fill out one form. That's something that's being discussed at the state legislature. to update, to include the local tax measures on our state return. And I think that that's the most efficient way to do it. We also agree, people in Multnomah County shouldn't have to file multiple tax returns. We would love it and do have interest at the state level to adopt new schedules to the state tax returns, and that would resolve that issue.
So one of the things you're emphasizing is that this is going to hit the wealthiest people, like that the vast majority of people won't see this. One point of contention that's come up is a question about whether home sales would be subject to the capital gains tax. I guess I'm wondering if first someone from the yes side can respond to that, as well as then someone from the no side.
Andrew, do you want to go and I can?
I think we have a housing expert here on this, Diana. I think you would be great to talk about whether or not this impacts housing. I think it's a really good point. I also really appreciate that we truly have clarity right now.
And actually, hold on just a second.
So yeah, absolutely.
Hold on just a second, because initially I'd ask maybe the yes side to respond to that. Are you guys fine with no side going first on this? Okay.
Sure. I'm Diana Collin. I am a Portland resident, Multnomah County resident, and a realtor. 37 years here in Portland, and the president of the Portland Metro Association of Realtors. We have nearly 8,000 members, and we're very concerned about the impact on affordability and what people can and can't do with the equity of their homes. And what we're hearing and what I'm understanding is that when we do talk to homeowners about this this measure 26238, they don't understand. They do not understand. When they hear capital gains, they think that that applies to everybody else but them. And if they could just understand that what we're talking about is upon the sale of their home and their equity, those dollars are going to have an additional tax. And I'm thinking of some clients I just worked with, Kristen and Karen, 2 daughters, helping out their father, who's in now assisted care and needing every penny out of his home equity to take care of him. In the meantime, while we were selling the home, they put it all on their credit cards. We had to get the home sold. It's his equity. He earned it, and they needed every dollar out of that. So, if it's $750 or $1,500 or $3,000, what I'm understanding is that if this does pass, these girls don't even know that they're going to have a capital gain tax hit on their father's money that has gone to help him now in assisted care. There are many stories like this here in Multnomah County. If there were somebody on Medicaid right now, and they are still allowed to keep their home, these are people who are being housed in their own home. If they were to decide to sell that home so that they can take the equity and use that for their own care, their own services, they will lose Medicare services. And now you're taxing their funds as well that they are taking to take care of themselves. So it's alarming to think that this is going to hit everybody. There's no safeguards, there's no limits. It's just, we all agree that helping the tenant situation is absolutely needed. There are things that are in place. Andrew will speak more to that we already have going. There's huge success going in, the last months and years. And but when you talk to actual homeowners in Multnomah County about this, they do not understand what this means, because they think capital gain is for the wealthy, and that's not what this is about. There is no limit on this, and this is going to be taxing on a lot of people.
And someone from the yes side want to respond?
Sure. So how capital gains are applied to the sale of a home in Oregon already, and federal, which is how we wrote the measure to mirror. We said, using the federal definition, which exempts the first $500,000 if you are selling your home as a couple, or $250,000 as an individual. Now, I know that the opposition is going to say, but you didn't write it in, you didn't copy the entire tax code and put it in your measure to write it in there. But that's how capital gains are assessed on the sale of homes. And this measure does the exact same thing. And we wrote in a year-long implementation period so that, all of those details can be worked out by the people at the county who are able to apply the federal tax code to this. And so all of the calculations, everything we've done to assess the amount is based on the sale of the primary residence. And so I think it's also important to denote your primary residence, where you live, that an increase on capital gains, which this is, would apply the same rules that already happen in Oregon and at the federal level, exempting the first $250,000 of profit, right? So not the whole cost of the sale of the home, but the profit you made. So exempting the first $250,000 for an individual or $500,000 for a couple. And so, yeah, so nothing that we have done has written in, is using those calculations. If you buy and sell homes that you don't live in, yes, this will impact you. And so again, if you look at who's opposing this, it's people who buy and sell homes that they don't live in. And that drives up, right, the cost of housing. When we talk about why housing is so expensive, it's because there are lots of people who are making a lot of money buying and selling homes rapidly. And so I think homeowners can rest assured. And the way that I know this to be true is because the opposition often points to a thing called a report that they commissioned. And if you read that report, it says could and may over and over. This could, or this may, right? And I think that it's really important to note could and may is doing all of the work there. And we will lobby, right? If the county commissioners decide that once this passes, if voters pass this and the county commissioners decide, you know what, we're going to rewrite how capital gains are taxed in our community, make them different from how we already collect them, we would be right there too and saying, no, that's not what we asked for. That's not what we want. We would lobby hard to make sure that people who are selling their homes that they live in have the same exemptions that are already applied. That's what we're asking. And so if you buy and sell, that's just, it will not apply to people who are selling the homes they live in.
So that's a misquote of the Perkins memo, the Perkins and Company memo from the largest locally owned accounting firm here in Portland. They donated their time to pull together that report because they feel strongly that this measure has unintended tax consequences that are going to impact a broad swath of Multnomah County residents. On the exclusion, what they wrote is that they believe that based on their expertise, that residents selling their home would not benefit from the federal exclusion on the sale of their principal residence and would owe the proposed local capital gains tax on all gains from the sale. I think what's important to note, of course, you're not going to pull over the entire federal or state tax code into a local ballot measure, but it's just missing some key provisions. The Washington State capital gains tax has clear exceptions for real estate, for all retirement accounts, for the sale of a small family-owned business, and on top of that, a $250,000 annual deduction. So if anything else that wasn't caught by those still protects lower moderate income folks with more modest investments. The Multnomah County tax code has a few specific references to what's called conformity with the state code. That's not referenced here. And the Oregon state tax code specifically calls out the way things are calculated at the federal level for the purposes of taxing sales of residences in Oregon. So it's not an assumed carryover. All of those codes have specific ties to the other codes to say we're going to conform with the way they calculate all of it, or conform to how this is taxed and what the exceptions are. And this measure doesn't have those.
Sure, and I'll respond by saying that the tax experts who helped create the tax measure, including Dr. Mary King, the economist, believe that this will not apply to it. So, you know, again, I think that word believe is doing a lot of work.
And she's a
we
tax
don't,
economist?
she's an economist,
Okay.
Mary King.
Does she have tax policy expertise?
Thank you. Yes, yes. And has actually crafted some of the tax policies for the preschool for now, or universal preschool now. And I just think
Not the one that was adopted.
So yes, she does have tax expertise, and she's not the only economist who has read the measure and supports it. We have we have a signed endorsement from 10 other local economists. 10 other local economists, and that can be seen in the voter pamphlet, who also believe that taxing capital gains is a just way to pay for a really important measure that prevents displacement in our communities. And that, and I just want to say, like, exempting real estate, again, we're merging lots of different things there. The primary house that you live in is different than real estate generally. And so exempting real estate is not a just way to do that. We are really it was written and designed to exempt the first $500,000 in profit from the sale of a home that people live in, if you're a couple, or $250,000 if you're an individual. So we are talking about, again, if the sale of your home, because the increase in equity caused by gentrification and caused by rising housing costs in our community has enabled you to walk away with hundreds of thousands of dollars over those limits. That yes, you'll be charged somewhere around, several hundred to several $1,000s that 1 year that you sell your home, as opposed to people who are buying and selling assets every year and making millions of dollars through stocks and bonds and other capital assets, and that those should be taxed those can be taxed at a small amount to pay for this program. And it's also important to remember that capital gains are taxed at a lower rate federally. The same, $1 of my wages is taxed more, and when I include my state taxes and my federal taxes, than $1 of capital gains, because they are taxed at a lower rate federally. And so that's why we targeted capital gains as a just and fair way to pay for a proven solution to reduce displacement in our communities.
Can you tell me how this measure was developed? Like, is it modeled after another city's program, specifically the capital gains aspect?
No, the capital gains is not. Other cities have done things like add a unit tax, right? So adding a tax to every housing unit, either rental, like a rental unit. And so we didn't want to do that. For one, we don't know that in Multnomah County. We actually don't know how many rental units, because landlords and realtors have fought really hard to make sure that we don't know how many rental units exist in our community. And so we couldn't do that. And we also, as Rebecca said, didn't want to tax something that could be passed down to tenants. And so the program, the details of the program are modeled after similar programs in San Francisco, Kansas City, as well as Philadelphia. Philadelphia is one of the really most successful right to counsel measures, because they're one of the programs that merges legal representation with emergency rental assistance. And our program does that as well. I spoke about stipulated agreements, which is one of the legal mechanisms that diverts evictions. Those stipulated agreements are really, really successful when we can pair immediate rental assistance to help people make those first immediate payments back. We want to make stipulated agreements durable so that they don't turn into evictions, further down the line. And by pairing emergency rental assistance, which our program does, with legal representation, like has been extremely successful in Philadelphia, we believe that that's the best way to use this money. The part of the program is modeled after what's working in San Francisco. And what it does is it disperses legal teams throughout the community. So instead of funneling everybody through one legal aid provider, which is one of the problems with what we have right now, lots of people are being turned away. The intake is really hard and difficult. And also there's lots of reasons that people, struggle to pick up the phone and dial another service provider. Instead, we want to make sure that the community-based organizations and nonprofit law firms in our community have legal teams on site so that when people call up, Community Alliance of Tenants, for example, or many of the other community-based organizations and say, hey, I'm facing eviction, what do I do? They don't have to say, go call this other thing, take an intake. They say, great, we've got a legal team right here, ready to help you. And that's what's working in San Francisco. It creates the conditions under which culturally specific legal representation is provided because it is housed at culturally specific organizations. And so the Tenant Resource Office that's created at the county through this program would disperse no less than 5 grants to organizations who want to house managing attorneys, paralegals, tenant outreach teams in their community-based organizations so that we can make sure that the coverage really meets all of the tenants who make that phone call. And then also, obviously, the notices of termination will have to notify tenants of their right. And we want to make sure that that outreach happens as early as possible and that we're not waiting until the cases get to court and we have that 3 to 7 day window, which is how the programs that have been mentioned before are working today. And tons of people are slipping through the gaps, right? It's great to say, yeah, we have funding that's possibly available. This could go to a program like this, except it hasn't. The county commissioners, the city of Portland are not funding programs at the levels they need, which is why we only have 9% of tenants represented, even with all of those programs functioning. And so the vast majority of tenants do not have representation right now. And so, the goal is to get every tenant the opportunity to get help that they need early as possible.
So let me
Can I just quickly respond to that. I'm going to drop a link in the chat to the matrix from the National Coalition for Civil Rights Council of all the other programs. Almost all rely on general revenue, general funding. A few have relied on federal funding. I think it's by my count 2 that rely on a specific source of funding. You'll also see most prioritize or exclusively for low-income tenants.
And for you guys, for Amy or Diana or Andrew, what about like the need for a more robust eviction prevention program? I guess, why shouldn't a voter who really, wants to ensure that people have legal representation, that there is a level playing field, what would you suggest, or what are you looking to for, answering voters like that?
Yeah, the zero disagreement on that. Actually, the whole element of this is programmatically agreed upon. There is zero dispute that people deserve representation. And again, going back to the original intention of the supportive housing services measure, we designed that tax in specific to address these issues, and it was designed with tax policy experts. And as both an economist and someone that has the only person probably can claim they've successfully adopted changes to measures post voter approval. The promises we keep hearing about, we'll fix that after the fact. We have to have a higher standard to bring to voters in terms of new taxation. I now, as someone who I can claim to be somewhat of an expert in taxation policy, have no idea what we are taxing right now based on this call. I know that we've heard some acknowledgments that yes, this taxed housing. Yes, this taxes small businesses. All those are true. So we're seeing a complete transparency now, which is fantastic. And I'll say this, we agree. In fact, if we had all worked together, if we'd been approached to say, hey, we need to make some corrections in the supportive housing services measure, we would go arm in arm. I'd be the first to lead into that. And we keep hearing, let's adopt things let's change this after it gets adopted. Well, it's interesting when the entire city council, the majority of the Multnomah County commissioner, our congress member, our state treasurer are all in opposition to this. It sends a message that you're going to have a tough road ahead working with all these people who have opposed this measure because they see how unworkable, how unnecessary it is. When we know we have revenue streams to support exactly what you're talking about. In fact, those same programs you're citing, and Amy just nailed it. They come out of general fund revenues, or they come from pre-existing dedicated revenue streams, like the supportive housing services measure. 25% of it is intended to prevent evictions and from people from dropping into a cycle of homelessness. And so I think when we keep talking about this, it's like, why do we need a capital gains tax, which will literally only pay for itself to get people representation? Based on the initial numbers from the Revenue Bureau, all the things you're talking about, we won't be able to pay for at least 2 years. So these are immediate needs. Let's work together to adjust the supportive housing services measure and get it right without taxing housing. When you make housing more expensive, more people are at risk of eviction. This is our most basic issue. We have made our region uninvestable. We have made our housing overly expensive, and we have created the highest taxation structure in the country. So let's work with the revenue streams that we have right now and get it right, and we'll join with you. In fact, I'll say our organization has been consistently calling out that housing and production, the unaffordability of our region are our top priorities. They are the top contributor to the overall size of the homelessness population in our region. Those are directly causally linked. So let's work together on the solutions that we all agree on without implementing a tax, which, let's just call it what it is. We are improvising here, folks. You do not know what a capital gains tax if you just say that this will just materialize locally. I can assure you, after someone that just worked 2 years to realign the Metro Supportive Housing Services business tax with 3 separate governments, this is not work that goes easy or lightly, and that you need complete coalition support to enact. And so I'll just say this, we just have got to stop applying the wrong solutions to certain problems. We have support for eviction representation. You're hearing it from all of us right now. We support this. We want to be helpful. We agree. And so let's work together to access the resources and make sure that they're aligned in the correct and proper way together, instead of having a divisive ballot measure that's going to force higher taxes on homeowners, seniors, retirement accounts, and small businesses.
It's only divisive to you all. If you look at the coalition that supports eviction representation for all in Measure 26238, you'll see that this measure has an incredible amount of community support behind it. Grassroots, tenants, people who are most impacted by evictions understand the importance of this measure.
I just want to, I want to correct something that Andrew said. At least what I heard was that you were the only person here who's helped pass a measure successfully. I put this in the chat, but maybe
I changed the measure after it's adopted.
Okay, I'm sorry. Nonetheless, I think the kind of recurring statement here that we all are supportive of eviction representation, I think that's great. I haven't introduced myself, so people who will be watching this, I'm the communications manager at Community Alliance of Tenants, which is the only statewide tenants' rights organization in Oregon. And so, you know, just this morning, I was talking with somebody, she's a Black elder, been in Portland her whole life. And she was telling me that they got a bunch of people inside of that building, which is the Alan Fremont's building, got eviction notices after an audit that was done on the paperwork. And it was for non-payments of rent. And simultaneously, while they're handing out these eviction notices, it says to this woman that you did not pay your rent and you also paid your rent for February. And so the 30-day notice that she got is long past due. But a lot of people who are, you know, in that building are very much on edge about what could happen to them next. Furthermore, there are people who live inside of that building who are on Section 8. So we all know about the rent cap, that at the beginning of the year, people could get their rents increased 14.6%, speaking of the unaffordability that's happening across our state. So that's not the rent increase these people got, but everybody in the building got notice that, hey, your rent's gonna go up at the top of the year. This woman was just telling me that they had to recant that statement because they also sent that notice to the people who are on Section 8 inside of that building. And so did they get their money back? She said, I'm not sure. But it also just seems like there's a lot of things happening right now at the Alan Fremonts, in addition to, longstanding arguments about non-repairs that are happening, dangerous conditions that people are living in. And let's not forget, again, this is a building full of Black people in the heart of Northeast Portland, where things are being heavily gentrified. And so in terms of the eviction representation piece, like how does any of this play into any of that? These are people that very well could end up in eviction court for non-payment unfairly. And so I think their case actually is not abnormal, because, you know, at Community Alliance of Tenants, we are hearing all the time, especially through our renters' rights hotline, of people who are being unfairly evicted, whether it's non-payment or rent or other issues. And so, you know, PSU, right in the heart of the pandemic, had put out a report that said that 125,000 people were on the brink of eviction during the pandemic. 125,000. Since all those pandemic era protections ended, we are seeing eviction spike to pre-pandemic levels right now. And though we're talking about the eviction filings, I was just on a training through the Oregon Law Center, who runs one of those programs that you all are referring to today, the Eviction Defense Project. And so I was on a training, and they were talking about, for every household that ends up in eviction court, they can guarantee that there's about 5 more households that didn't make it into eviction court because of a host of reasons, including self-eviction, because people are so afraid of getting caught up in the eviction machine.
So let me ask though, I mean, why
It's
is a
important
capital
context.
gains tax the way to do this, especially knowing that it is going to have to devote at least, you know, $20 million just to implementation? That's money that's not going to eviction prevention. It's not going to help people stay in their homes. It's going to the sole cost of administering a tax. Why is that the best way to do this, as opposed to saying this stream of revenue we already have, we should devote a greater cut of it to go to eviction prevention?
But before that part is answered by people who are more familiar with the capital gains tax, let me say this. Like, I think it's important that most of the things on the ballot that impact people who are most impacted by things, I can almost guarantee that people don't understand all the mechanisms that help fund what's happening in our state. Now, is this a problem with the education system? Is this a problem with how we do civics in our country? Is this a problem with, you know, how we fund the programs that are charged with giving out information to the community? Who knows what the actual issue is here with that part of it? But ultimately, I think this is not like an issue in terms of, when I talked to this tenant this morning about what's going on with her building, I said, you know, there's a measure on the ballot right now that will give people representation in court when they go to eviction court. And she said, oh, that's important. We need that. And so again, everybody here is saying we need eviction representation for all. And I think that's really important. And so you're right. There's probably the average tenant who's living and having to deal with gentrification right now is not a tax expert. Y'all are right. The average tenant who is living and has a family who is having to choose between paying for medicine and having to pay or pay their rent, they probably don't know the tax code. And y'all are absolutely correct about that. But I bet you if they had a lawyer in court, they would be happy. If they called our renters' rights hotline today and knew that they could get referred to a lawyer, they would be happy. And then, you know what, they will also probably end up housed and staying housed. And so I think that's the important thing, is not to treat the average tenant as if they're supposed to be an expert in tax law.
But
although
right.
I think the crafters of the crafters of the measure have done a lot of due diligence to make sure that tenants don't have to be that.
I do want to make one point related to what Donovan is saying before we get back to the tax measure. To your earlier question, Helen, of, you know, is the current funding stream adequate? You know, would it need adjustments? One thing I actually think we would all agree on here is, at least until 2 weeks ago, broad knowledge that these programs existed isn't there. You know, when tenants are getting evicted, they don't necessarily know that resources exist. But that gap was closed 2 weeks ago when the governor signed HB 2001. So as of March 29th, landlords are required to provide notice of how to access these resources, you know, by calling 211, going to the Bar Association's information page. And that notice has been drafted by the Oregon Department of Justice and is required to be distributed in 6 languages.
So
Yeah, I
Go ahead,
mean,
Colleen.
calling 211 right now gets you turned away. That's what happens. Tenants who call 211 are turned away because the programs are not adequately funded to represent the amount of tenants who need representation in our community. And so
Okay.
so tenants are being turned away every day from those programs, which is why only 9%, actually the 9% is from 2022. Now in Multnomah County, it's closer to 5 or 3 or 2% a month of tenants who have legal representation based on the programs that exist that are only temporarily funded. So I think Helen, you have asked an important question. So I think let's start by saying early on, we did talk to elected officials, and elected officials said, you have to bring money to the table. We cannot create a new program if you don't bring money to the table. So this idea that we skipped over some important step or that we didn't look for what was available is not true. Any of the jurisdictions could have applied money, and they haven't. And this, again, if we're talking about promises, this expectation that they may into the future, ARPA funds are running out, right? The ARPA funds, which has created, you know, a kind of a flush situation, that's the COVID money, that's running out. We should not rely on that fund to create an ongoing program. So we were told, bring money with it. ARPA funds did not make sense. This idea that general funds are like just always available, I also think is not true. That's tax money. General funds are waged taxes. So it's all taxes. It's not like this is a tax and general funds aren't taxes. They're just taxes paid by somebody else. Capital gains, again, I'll point people back to the Oregon Center for Public Policy's report. Capital gains are paid by a very few people who make a ton of money. I think it's important to remember, we are talking about stocks and bonds primarily. The annual ongoing sales of investments. And so, and you don't hear the opposition talking about that because they don't want to admit that the majority of the money that is taxable under this measure is money that is invested stocks and bonds, as well as other types of quote unquote real properties. So commercial properties, right? If you buy and sell a large building like the one I live in, that will be taxed. The profits you make on the sale of selling new developments, again, which is why if you look at who is funding the opposition, it's wealth management firms, it's development and real estate firms that rely on the turning over of real estate. So stocks and bonds.
Only if you're a local resident. So it would be penalizing local investors in housing and
we have no way of taxing people who live outside of the state and are buying in our community. That's also an impossible tax thing. I may not be a tax expert, but I know that is just not possible. So this idea, I think this idea that we're experts in programs, and we relied on Mary King and other folks to identify capital gains as an undertaxed source of money. It is currently unfair that wages are taxed at a higher rate than capital gains in our community. And we identified that and said, that seems really bad. And then knowing that less than 20% of Oregonians report capital gains. Again, we are talking about 4 out of 5 Oregonians who do not, pay capital gains because it doesn't apply to them. And that's why we identified capital gains as a fair and equitable way to pay for a really important program.
But the concern that we have, the concern that we have is that it is, you have to raise twice as much potentially as what you're envisioning spending just to administer it. And so how is that effective? Or, whether they're wealthy taxpayers or not, there is an expectation that government is going to use taxpayer dollars wisely. And so if there is that that possibility of having a certain amount of money, is it really, is it valuable to be putting that into tax administration collection as opposed to the actual services and needs that are out there?
Early on in our coalition building process, we spent a lot of time talking to the union that represents the city commissioners' workers, the people who would actually be putting together the program to talk about this. And they voiced similar concerns. But through our analysis with Stout Financial and through like looking at the downstream, you know, all of the different kind of like the different processes that combine and build onto each other, we were able to get their support, that like they think that we can make this happen with the funds that are available. I'm sorry, that was kind of like butchered way to say that. But I just want to reiterate is that like the people who would actually be putting together this policy, this program, have already endorsed, and they want to be able to provide this to Multnomah County residents. And so
you don't disagree with this estimation that it would be half the annual revenue and cost for collection?
Can you clarify that? Sorry, you cut out a little bit.
Oh, sorry. What is your estimation for the startup cost in terms of collecting this tax?
Colleen, I think you have a, yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. So the estimation, right, there's this front loading, there's this huge front loading cost based on that estimation. And I think that that's based on some dates that were written into the measure. We wrote and submitted the measure to be eligible for the November 22 ballot, right? Unfortunately, we were sued by the PBA, the Portland Business Alliance, which delayed the amount of time before we were able to successfully gather enough signatures to get on the ballot. And now we're on the May ballot. But the dates from when the original measure was written saying that the tax collection had to start is now shifted because we're on the May measure. And so that estimation for how much it's going to cost to set up is squeezed, the time is squeezed because they're using the dates that we assumed for the November ballot. The measure also says that there's a year implementation period. So if they took the whole year, they would not have to do the things that they are saying is going to cost so much money, which is implement it really, really fast, basically. And they could absolutely reduce the upfront costs, the first year cost to get the program set up by taking the whole year of implementation that we have allowed. That is just now pushed back 6 months because the date isn't what was based on a November vote, but would be now based on a May vote. So no, we don't agree that the upfront costs have to be as high as that report says, because we are just asking take the full year instead of squeezing it into the shorter timeline. And then again, I think it is important to go
clarify. If you're saying take the full year, are you saying take the full year to set up collection? And if that's the case, when would services actually start?
Yeah, take the year to do the implementation. And that is including figuring out the tax collection as well as setting up the programs, the implementation period or
So
services
would be available.
A year later.
So
the crisis we're in right now, to take a tax and start it a year from now for something that has 50% overhead, I would want to talk to tenants and make sure that they are aware that these resources won't be available for a year from now. And in addition, it's clear to understand that half of the revenue, let's just get away the implementation costs. We're talking 50% overhead. I imagine there's better uses for revenue.
Overhead includes the cost of the program. That's like the cost of people who work the program. That's what the cost is.
No, the memo from the Revenue Bureau is specifically for collection costs. That would be separate from the county's overhead to set up the tenant resource office.
We haven't even gotten into the overhead collection piece.
If the county uses that measure, but it doesn't, we don't have to. We do not have to create a new tax form for this. Nothing in the measure says that we have to create a new tax form through the city of Portland, there are other ways to collect this tax, and the county could, we absolutely hope that the county would say, what is the most effective way to collect this tax? And as we know, creating a new tax form is not the most effective way. We absolutely would work with us and other of the local tax, measures to find a better and cheaper way to collect local taxes. We have enough of them. We should collect them more cost efficiently.
So the Department of Revenue has declined to collect the Metro Supportive Homeless Services tax. Are you confident, like has the city of Portland committed to collect this if this is passed? Do you know who would be responsible for collecting it? So could the county then be required to set up an income capital gains tax division in order to collect this tax?
Can I have to interject before, again, the people who are more knowledgeable on this. I think for a lot of the people who we work with every single day, looking back at today's interview, they will not leave like being better experts on the tax system here in Multnomah County. I think this and that shows the disconnect between like what the opposition is talking about in regards to the actual crisis that we're going through, because at the end of the day, like Andrew, this was the first time I actually heard him say he would like to talk to tenants, and the experience that they would have with this measure in talking about overhead costs. That's not what the person that I just spoke with this morning would want to talk to you about. And she wants to talk about the Black elders that are in her building that are about to experience eviction and have to go through the system quite possibly without eviction representation. And so I think, again, like this is not to pivot the conversation. It's important that we actually talk about what this is actually based in. We're having a housing crisis right now because people cannot afford to live in their homes. People are being unfairly evicted out of their homes. People are being predatorily evicted out of their homes right now in Oregon and Multnomah County. And this, we're in Fair Housing Month right now. And this is happening right now for people. People are being evicted. When we were doing the call downs for another measure that I won't mention right now, I called somebody and he was sitting right there. He's like, I'm not sure I can follow up with you, man. I'm in eviction court right now. And then when I tried to follow up with him a week later, couldn't get an answer. And then I tried to give him a call again and couldn't get an answer. So this is what we're actually talking about.
And so Donovan, I guess my question would be that, like, if you have a situation where you can devote another $40 million just to eviction prevention, is it better to devote, 40 million from something you already have versus create a new mechanism and give it only 20 because you have to spend that other 20 million just setting it up? Which do you think tenants would prefer?
I think tenants would prefer that we roll back the amount that they can just be having the rents jacked up on them in terms of talking about how much we need to build up. I think that's what we're dealing with, is people having to deal with things that are increasing in terms of their housing costs, but not increasing in terms of how much money they're making. I think we're talking about tenants that have very little knowledge in terms of the day-to-day of their rights as tenants, and landlords who usually can lean into the legal system and do know their rights, and then oftentimes will predatorily use the law to evict people and aid into our housing crisis. And so if you give me that question in terms of let's divert money from here or do here, I think what we're seeing oftentimes is a pivot from any of the measures that tenants from the ground up have said, this will help us, and then say, oh no, not that way. Oh no, you guys don't understand. You guys, you just don't quite get it, guys. I know you guys want to stay housed and we want you to stay housed too, but not that way. Meanwhile, the person that I called got evicted. the
Yeah.
other person that I just spoke with got evicted. So I think that's the important thing to remember here.
Yeah, I would like to add to that. I think that that's such a strong point. I would love it if any jurisdiction beat us to the punch. Look, like, please beat us to the punch. We've been working at this for 2 years, and that money has been available that whole time. We have been talking about this program. We have made it possible. We have said this is what it would do. People say, yes, we agree. Yes, we agree. Man, take this, snatch the victory from us. Do it. Please, just do it. But this thing about like, whoa, well, it's not going to happen for another year. We are a coalition of over 60 organizations led by tenants who have fought their own evictions. We are members of tenants collectives. We're people who have been years, hours and hours of court observation to help ourselves and help each other, because no jurisdiction has done what is proven. So please, if somebody wanted to do it next week, next month, take our whole program and just say, boom, it's paid for, we would love it. We would absolutely love it. But the thing is, it isn't happening. It isn't, the money is there and they're using it for other things. And so we are saying, we need this, and we needed a dedicated revenue to do it. We found a fair and equitable way to pay for it. And we are trying to put it in front of voters so that people who live here can take a vote and say, yes, this is important. But look, if the county commissioners, city council, state of Oregon wants to beat us to the punch, we welcome that. Please use the money that is available and implement a program like that. And if not, then don't throw cold water on the 2 years of hard work. 30,000 signatures gathered, over 60,000, representing thousands of people who live in Multnomah County, labor unions, teachers who are seeing their students evicted, teachers who can't afford to live near where they work, from doing the work ourselves because nobody else was doing it for us. And so I just say, what would I rather? Absolutely, I would have rather have had this 5 years ago. I would have rather have had it done during COVID, when lots of money was available. And when the most money was available, nobody did it. And so we're doing it ourselves. And that's why we use the Citizens Initiative to get it on the ballot, because we cannot wait. We cannot wait any longer.
Thank you. I did have one last question for any of you. Does anyone know if there is a local capital gains tax, any city that has a local capital gains tax?
It's our understanding that there's not. Plenty of places are tax capital gains as income, including Multnomah County and Oregon, but not as a standalone.
And I think that's also interesting to note too, is like when we see who's making donations to our opposition campaign, there's a lot of out-of-state money who see those local capital gains as a threat, because they do get to benefit from the lower federal tax rate and don't have to pay as many taxes on capital gains. And so when we think about what's going on here, it's very clearly and obviously a David and Goliath situation, where we have tenants who are trying to fight to stay housed. We have tenants who want to just keep living their lives as normal. And we have people who can pull their purse strings out, throw $200,000 at a campaign across the country because they feel threatened by the grassroots efforts that's being taken place here in Portland. I think everybody here should be extremely proud to see a measure like Measure 26238 on the ballot. That should represent so much good, so much resiliency, so much power to the people who need it the most.
Great,
I
thank you.
will speak up
So,
and really, I just have to
well,
say.
let me just ask real quick. Do you guys have a minute? Because if so, I'm willing to give both sides a minute to just wrap up. But I know that we've gone over. Is that good? Okay. So Andrew, do you want to go first?
Yeah, first I'll just point out that actually, this continued commentary that nobody is doing anything about it, I think devalues the work of our colleagues that are in government, that are trying their best. $18 million dedicated by Multnomah County for eviction representation services and upstream solutions this past year from the supportive housing services measure is exemplary of that. HB 2001 is exemplary of that. To say that we're not a coalition either, I'd like you to say that to Hacienda CDC, who represents homeownership and development in our communities of color. that also let's talk to Apano about how they feel about this. Or for example, the affinity groups of the realtors representing marginalized communities as well. I think it's important to represent that for the first time ever, our regional elected officials who aren't exactly typically on the side of opposing new revenue streams are here saying, we're working on this together in coalition and we're doing our part. So I think let's point out to the fact that the unified opposition between businesses, local community groups, and the community at large, including labor as well, also opposing this. So we all have coalitions, but I think the big line topic here is that we are agreeing on what the issues are. How we address them by working together is not by enacting an experimental, only of its kind in the nation tax that literally will only pay for itself and will divert resources from those that actually need them. And we would be happy to work with anybody to make sure that the supportive housing services measure is addressing these issues. But I think we have to be realistic. This measure taxes housing and makes it more expensive. It taxes small businesses. I'm glad that you recognize that. They're struggling right now. Our economy is struggling. We are losing people from our community right now. Our population is declining. We have the highest tax location in the nation. So to say that people are not putting their resources where their hearts are is simply not true. We have advanced the tax on the business community repeatedly to pay for key community concerns. And we'll continue to work with anybody that wants to address these issues. So with that, I want to urge this board to vote no, to advise its readers to vote no. And thank you for the time today and the coverage.
Great, thank you. And I'm not sure, Colleen or Donovan or Rebecca?
I can end us. I want to reiterate what Donovan said earlier, where you talk this big game that you want to help people, that people are doing things to help other people and work is being done, right? And then when people do work as well, you're out here saying you're not doing it the right way. You're not doing it in the way that makes sense. You should listen to us, the people who have created a lot of the problems that we are in right now. You talk about like home ownership being a driver of housing prices. All of these are things that have been created because we've valued development, we've valued home ownership, we've valued real estate and the financialization of housing more than we valued the people who live in the shelter that they need to survive. And it's really, really important that we understand what is on the ballot, right? If we vote no on this, you are voting for evictions. If you vote yes on this, you want to support people so that they don't have to be displaced.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much for your time, everyone. I think my Zoom program, thank you, it seems to be going crazy. But I appreciate all your time. If I have any follow-up questions, I'll email or call you. But yeah, I appreciate the conversation. It was really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you for your
Colleen.
time.